Great to have this guy making a return visit to Philly Pressbox Radio, even though he's now doing so as, well, someone from enemy territory, former Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs broadcaster, but now pre- and post-game radio host for the New York Mets. It's Pat McCarthy. Hey, Pat.
Hey, Chet, how are you? Great to see you.
I'm doing all right. So, yeah, you called Iron Pigs games the last, I guess, 4 seasons, I believe. Now you're working up I-95 for the Phillies' rival New York Mets. I'll ask about the team in a bit, but let me ask you about things on your end. I mentioned you do the pre- and post-game shows. Have you gotten to call some games up there as well?
Yeah, so, in addition to my role for doing all 162 for pre and post, I've also done about 25 games of play-by-play, and I did about 10 games down in spring training, so it's been great. So it's all said and done, and have about 40 games doing play-by-play with the Mets with my new partner, Keith Rad, when Howie Rose takes some games off. It's been pretty awesome.
Yeah, you mentioned Howie Rose, who's been calling Mets games for more than a quarter century. He also worked with your dad, I believe, for a year or two while Tom was up there. Let me put up a shot of Howie Rose. He's also done play-by-play for the Islanders and Rangers. He's something of a legend, I guess, in terms of New York sports broadcasting, is he not?
Yeah, he absolutely is. And most recently, he became a Mets Hall of Famer. He's born and raised in Queens. He's been a lifelong Mets fan. And, he started in a similar role that I was, hosting the postgame show back in the 80s, and then gradually worked his way into the television booth and now into the radio booth. And he is not only a legend in terms of broadcasting, but he's a legend in terms of a person as well. He's absolutely unbelievable to learn from every single day. Whether it's baseball, whether it's hockey, he is tremendous at what he does. And what is really impressive about Howie is he's self-taught. Most people work their way through the system to go into doing play-by-play. He jumped into it. He was a talk guy doing, sports talk radio, and then jumped right into doing some Rangers and then the Islanders, and then ultimately with his favorite club, the Mets.
And you mentioned Keith. Keith is also new to the organization this year, isn't he?
There he is, yeah. Keith's in his first season with me. We got hired at the same time. Keith is coming from A-ball, from Brooklyn, which is just an incredible jump. For him to go from, at one point, short season, then to high A, to now being in the number 2 chair of a major league booth, it's a testament to his ability. It's a testament to how good he is. And for us to come into this together has been really special. We got asked the other day, what has the transition been like? Because not only did we not work together prior to this year, we really hadn't met each other. We'd never spoken before. And we've jumped into this new partnership together pretty seamlessly. And I think it's because, number one, we're both around the same age. Keith just turned 30. I just turned 28. So, we grew up in the same generation, but we've also become really good friends outside of the booth as well, which I think has paid huge dividends in terms of our chemistry on the air.
You just made me depressed, Pat. I put your 2 ages together, and I'm older than the both of you combined.
Yeah, Howie makes that joke all the time as well, because Howie is also older than the 2 ages combined.
Oh, my. Well, let's talk about the Mets. At the end of May, beginning of June, the Mets swept the Phillies at Citi Field to improve to 3 games over 500, then promptly lost 7 in a row, 9 of 10. They also lost Pete Alonso for a little bit of time. He was just reinstated the other day. What the heck happened to the Mets here in June?
Well, Chet, I think it's been a couple of things. Number one, you lose Alonso for, even though it was 10 games, which is a lot less than people thought, that's a massive hole in the lineup. You think about the fact that he missed those 10 games. He's still first in the National League in home runs. He's just trailing Shohei Ohtani for the major league lead that he held for most of this season. But that's a massive piece of your lineup that's missing for 10 games. And, the Pirates were a team that were surging at the time. They've since, kind of fallen off since they took 2 of 3 from the Mets. But the other thing is, it's the starting pitching, which has been better recently. Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer over the first 2 games against the Astros were really good, despite the fact that the Mets split the first 2 games against Houston. So I think that's part of it, is just getting consistent starting pitching night in and night out. Every time it seems like the Mets have turned the corner in terms of the starting pitching. Somebody in the 5 has a little bit of a step back. And I think they're still waiting to get healthy. Jose Quintana's on his way back. And if he is back around the All-Star break, that's a massive trade acquisition-like addition to this rotation, because this Mets rotation, which was set up, Kodai Senga is the only one that has made consistent turns through the rotation. Everybody else, whether that's Verlander, Scherzer, Carlos Carrasco, has missed time due to either injury or suspension. And Jose Quintana has not even pitched yet. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I also think Edwin Diaz, despite how good the back end of the Mets bullpen has been, not having Edwin Diaz back there is huge. And you knew it was going to be. But David Robertson's been really good as the Mets closer, and Adam Ottavino has stepped up as well. But those were the guys that were supposed to pitch in the 7th and the 8th inning to get the ball to Edwin Diaz in the 9th. And that's just not the case, because those guys are forced to pitch one inning later. So I think it's a handful of things. I think, the lineup hasn't completely come together yet, despite the fact that there's some guys having some really good seasons. And I think they're just waiting for those guys to turn the corner.
Yeah, the Mets pitching staff certainly has experience, not to mention a couple of future Hall of Famers in Verlander and Max Scherzer. Verlander at age 40 may finally be showing, some of that age, but Scherzer still looks darn good. And Senga, who you mentioned, looked terrific in shutting down the Phillies 3 weeks ago. I like that Senga. He's pretty good.
Yeah, he's special. And I think he's only going to get better. I think it gets lost sometimes, the adjustment that players need to make when they come over from Japan, especially right now for Kodai Senga, because he's not only trying to learn the language, he's trying to learn the game in the United States, but there's all these rules that American players and players that have grown up in the majors are trying to learn. And here comes Kodai Senga. He's trying to adjust to all these different things. He's got to learn the pitch clock. He's got to learn the disengagement rules. So there's so much being thrown at him right now. I think he's only going to get better. He's got a really big personality that, even despite the language barrier, still shows. I think he's going to be really good. And when that ghost fork is good, teams cannot touch it.
Pat, the Mets have really had the Phillies number last year and this, winning 17 of 22 meetings. You've seen it from both sides. How is that possible?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have seen it from both sides. And I think it's, number one, I think the Mets just play really well against the Phillies. And if you look at the series in New York the other day, or a couple of weeks ago, it was a close series the entire way. A couple of things go differently here and there. And we're talking about a different storyline right now, but the Mets just figure out a way to beat the Phillies. And you go back to the game at Citizens Bank last year, where the Mets erased the 7-run deficit in the 9th inning. New York just figures out a way to beat Philadelphia. This is going to be a really interesting series when these two teams meet over the weekend, because you're going to have a Phillies team coming off a series against Atlanta. Be interesting to see how that unfolds. And the Mets are going for a series win against Houston in the finale. The Mets haven't won a series since they swept the Phillies at the beginning of June. So this could be a weekend set of the Mets are either coming in saying, okay, we just won a series. Now we can go to Citizens Bank Park, a place that they've had success. Or it's, okay, we're going to Citizens Bank Park needing to win a series because you've continued to drop 2 of 3, 3 of 4 at a time. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think these are two teams that, not that it's make or break time before we get to the final week before the All-Star break, but it's getting pretty close.
Well, the Phillies last year got hot at the right time, snagged that final wild card spot, got to the World Series. Over the winter, they added Trey Turner, former Met Taijuan Walker, plus some key bullpen pieces. Is this Phillies team, you think, better than last year's?
I think it's interesting. I think on paper, you think Trey Turner, obviously that's a massive improvement for the Phillies, but you lost Rhys Hoskins. And, no matter what, whether that's the production on the field or away from the field, that's a massive loss for this Phillies team. Cody Clemens seems like he's done a really nice job filling in, but I think that you can't overstate how important Rhys Hoskins is to the lineup. And I still think that the bullpen needs to improve from the Phillies' perspective. I just think that they're in a kind of a similar situation that the Mets are, needing that one extra arm to kind of lock things down in the bridge innings to get things to, whether that's Craig Kimbrell in the Phillies case or David Robertson in the Mets case. So I think these teams are kind of in similar positions in terms of their roster makeups, and in a similar position that they were last year, that they're both teams that are built to contend and get to the World Series.
As far as the Philly starter, Zach Wheeler's been pretty good this season. Ranger Suarez looks like he's certainly back on track. But the guy who's going this evening against the Braves, Aaron Nola, has really had kind of a strange season. He's among the leaders in innings pitched. He's still getting his strikeouts, but in many of his games, he's had like one bad inning, and he seems like he, like Senga, maybe is still struggling to get used to the pitch clock. What's your take on Aaron Nola?
Yeah, I think he's in a very similar situation that a lot of guys are in. I think that pitchers across Major League Baseball have become accustomed to a certain way of pitching, and pitchers are creatures of habits. They like to work the clock. They like, and figuratively speaking, work the clock in terms of forcing the tempo on their own. So I think when it comes to Aaron Nola, I think when it comes to guys like Kodai Senga, Carlos Carrasco went through it early on for the Mets, that these guys are just taking some extra time to kind of figure things out and figure out ways to pitch with the clock versus pitching against the clock.
Pat, I know you're hoping to be working with the Mets into October or even November, but beyond that, what's your winter broadcasting schedule looking like?
Yeah, still trying to, kind of shape it all, but the plan is to go back to St. Joe's and go back to Princeton and call some hoops for the Hawks and the Tigers. All three of those programs are trending in the right direction, whether that's the men's and the women's side on St. Joseph's side. And then on Princeton's side, Tigers just went to the Sweet 16 and looking to build on that. And I'm excited to be a part of it. I love calling hoops in the winter. It is a ton of fun. It's a great experience, and it keeps me sharp. And they're teams that I grew up rooting for, whether that was St. Joe's and Princeton, which is pretty special.
Yeah, like your dad, you seem to be able to do it all. Your dad, Tom McCarthy, is often called T-Mac. I should know this. Do people call you P-Mac at all?
Not as much as people call him T-Mac, for sure. When I was younger and playing baseball in college and stuff like that, sometimes they called me P-Mac. But no, not really. Not for the most part. A couple of buddies will say it here and there, but it hasn't caught on.
Gotcha. Well, let's hope for a good weekend. The Mets and Phillies at the ballpark. Pat McCarthy, great to see you and talk to you once again.
Yeah, thanks, Chet. Appreciate it.